Ilhan Omar just made the catastrophic mistake of insulting the one man in Washington who does math for fun, and she did it on a committee that oversees the federal budget. What the congresswoman from Minnesota didn't understand, what nobody who watches the viral clips really understands, is that John Kennedy's Country Lawyer Act is not an act. It's a delivery system. Behind the Boudreaux stories and the drawl and the bless-your-heart smile is a man who graduated magna cum laude from the University of Virginia, earned his law degree from Oxford, and edited Law Review at Vanderbilt. He was the secretary of the Louisiana Department of Revenue, the man whose literal job was auditing other people's numbers. And when someone's numbers don't add up, John Kennedy doesn't raise his voice. He just keeps asking questions. Simple questions, arithmetic questions, the kind of questions you learn to answer in third grade, unless the answers lead somewhere you don't want to go. Ilhan Omar's numbers didn't add up. Not one of them. Her financial disclosure was off by $29.9 million. Her husband's winery was valued at $5 million with $650 in its bank account. Her name appeared 6 times in the emails of a $250 million fraud ring. The Minnesota Campaign Finance Board had just found she broke the law 5 days before this hearing, and she sat down at the Budget Committee, turned to the man who audits numbers for a living, and told him he should investigate his own state. She insulted the auditor, and the auditor had already done the audit. The hearing was titled Federal Fraud Prevention and Oversight Strengthening Accountability in Taxpayer-Funded Programs. It was a Wednesday morning in mid-May, and the Senate Budget Committee hearing room on the first floor of the Dirksen Building had the particular quality of all congressional hearing rooms: too cold, too bright, the air slightly stale from the ventilation system that had been running since before most of the senators were born. What made this hearing different from the hundreds that had preceded it in this room was not the subject matter. Fraud prevention hearings happened 3 or 4 times a year, and they followed a predictable rhythm: opening statements about waste and accountability, testimony from inspectors general, questions that went nowhere, a press release, and lunch. What made this hearing different was the seating chart. Ilhan Omar sat at the committee dais, the elevated, curved wooden bench where committee members sit during hearings, each behind a brass nameplate, each with a microphone, each with a water glass and a stack of briefing materials prepared by staff. She had been assigned to the Budget Committee at the beginning of the session, and she sat near the far right end of the dais, 3 seats from the chairman. John Kennedy sat 5 seats to her left. They were on the same side of the table, the same elevation, the same bench. They could see each other's briefing materials if they leaned slightly. They could hear each other's staff whispering. They shared a water pitcher. This was not a debate stage with 2 podiums and a moderator. This was not a hearing room where one side asks questions and the other side answers. This was a committee meeting, colleagues technically sitting together to conduct the people's business. The proximity was intimate. The proximity was brutal. The committee chairman gave the hearing to order at 1007 a.m. Opening statements began. Omar spoke third. She was supposed to deliver opening remarks about fraud prevention in federal nutrition programs, a topic she had spoken about before, and one that her staff had prepared a careful statement on, focusing on the need for systemic reform rather than political finger-pointing. The statement was 4 minutes long. It was measured. It was appropriate. She abandoned it 90 seconds in. The irony of this hearing, Omar said, looking up from her prepared remarks with the expression of someone who had decided in real time to say what she actually thought instead of what her staff had written, is that the biggest fraud in this room isn't in any case. File. The hearing room shifted. Staff members who had been looking at their phones put them down. The chairman's gavel hand twitched. The biggest fraud is the performance of concern. The performance of accountability by senators who pretend to care about waste while rubber-stamping tax cuts for billionaires. She turned to her left, toward Kennedy. The movement was deliberate, visible, unmistakable. Senator Kennedy sits here every hearing, every committee meeting, playing his little country lawyer act, asking his little gotcha questions, getting his little viral clips for his little YouTube channel. Bless your heart down in Louisiana, as we say back home. It's a very cute act, Senator. Very folksy, very charming. Her voice had an edge now. But the kind of controlled contempt that comes from someone who has been thinking these words for months and has finally decided to say them out loud. But while you're performing for the cameras, Senator, your state of Louisiana ranks 49th in education, 48th in health care, dead last in child poverty, dead last. Your children are the poorest in the nation, and you're sitting here making YouTube clips about fraud prevention. A murmur from the Democratic side of the dais. On the Republican side, a senator leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. The posture of a man who has watched someone step on a landmine and is waiting for the sound. Maybe before you investigate my district, Senator Kennedy, you should investigate why yours is failing. Maybe before you ask me about numbers, you should ask yourself why Louisiana can't add. She turned back to the microphone, adjusted her nameplate, folded her hands. Done. Kennedy sat 5 seats away. He had been holding a pen over a legal pad. The pen had stopped moving when Omar turned toward him, and it had not moved since. His reading glasses were at the end of his nose. His expression was the one that anyone who watched Senate hearings knew. The half-smile, the slight tilt of the head, the look of a man who has just been told something genuinely interesting by someone who has no idea what they've just done. He waited. The chairman looked at Kennedy. Senator Kennedy, would you like to respond before we proceed to witnesses? Kennedy leaned forward, adjusted his microphone. The sound of the microphone adjusting, a small scrape, a click, was the loudest thing in the room. Mr. Chairman, Kennedy said, I would. He reached below the dais and retrieved a manila folder, not thick, maybe 30 pages. He set it on the desk, placed his hand on top of it, and looked at Omar. Congresswoman, he said, thank you for that, truly. I especially liked the part about Louisiana not being able to add. That was good. I'll use that. A nervous laugh from somewhere in the gallery. But since you brought up numbers, and since this is the Budget Committee, and numbers are supposed to be our business, I'd like to talk about some numbers. Your numbers. He reached below the dais. The movement was slow, deliberate. The movement of a man who has prepared for this moment, and is in no hurry to rush it. When his hand came back up, it was holding a manila folder, not thick, maybe 30 pages. He set it on the desk, placed his hand on top of it, the way a preacher places his hand on a Bible before reading from it, and looked at Omar. The folder changed the energy in the room, because folders in Senate hearings mean evidence. Folders mean someone has done homework. Folders mean the questions that follow are not rhetorical. They have answers, and the person asking already knows what those answers are. After your little speech about my state's arithmetic, I thought I'd check yours. So I asked Budget Committee staff to do something simple. I asked them to take your 2024 financial disclosure, the one you filed in May 2025, and your amended disclosure, the one you filed in March 2026, and compare them line by line. Not the totals, the line items, every entry. He held up a document, several pages stapled, with colored highlighting visible from across the room, green, yellow, red, the traffic light system of forensic accounting, where red means the numbers don't just disagree, they contradict. They found 17 discrepancies. The word landed differently than the statistics. 17 was not a headline number. It was a forensic number. It was the kind of number that comes from someone who actually sat down and read both documents with a highlighter and a calculator and a cup of coffee that went cold because the discrepancies kept multiplying. Not one error, Congresswoman. Not a typo. Not a transposition. 17 individual line items that don't match between your original filing and your amended filing. And in several cases, the amended number is more wrong than the original. Omar's hand, which had been resting on her nameplate, moved to the stack of briefing materials in front of her. She began flipping pages, the instinct of someone looking for a talking point that would explain what was about to happen. There was no talking point for this. There is no talking point for 17. Let me give you 3 examples, Kennedy said. Just 3. Because we don't have all day, and I'd like to get to lunch. He ran his finger down the highlighted document. Example 1. Rose Lake Capital LLC, your husband's venture capital firm. Original disclosure valued between $1 million and $25 million. Amended disclosure 0. Now, your husband's own email to his accountant, which is in the public record thanks to Chairman Comer's investigation, valued Rose Lake at $7.9 million in 2025, so the original was too high. The amended is too low, and the actual number is somewhere in between. You went from wrong to wrong in the other direction. Kennedy looked up. That's not a correction, Congresswoman. That's a cover-up that overshot. Example 2. Line 7. Schedule B. Consulting income. E. Street Group. $287,000. This line appears on both disclosures, original and amended. You didn't correct it. Your accountant didn't catch it. Nobody touched it. He paused. E Street Group was your husband's consulting firm. It shut down in 2021. It is no longer a functioning business. It has not been a functioning business for 3 years. How is a company that shut down in 2021 generating $287,000 in consulting income in 2024? Omar opened her mouth. That's my husband's. Mom, your name is on the disclosure, Kennedy interrupted. You signed it under penalty of perjury. If you want to tell me your husband filed it, that's fine, but it's your signature and it's your legal obligation. So I'll ask again. How does a closed company generate $287,000? Silence. Example 3. Kennedy continued. Line 12. Speaking fees. Original disclosure $45,000. Amended disclosure $12,000. That's a $33,000 difference. Somewhere out there, audiences who paid you a total of $33,000 to speak apparently didn't exist. Or they did exist, and you'd rather not discuss them. He closed the document. Mom, when one number is wrong, that's an error. I've made errors. Everybody makes errors. But when 17 numbers are wrong, when you correct a filing and the correction has its own errors, and you miss a $287,000 line item from a company that doesn't exist anymore, that is not your accountant's problem. He looked at her over his glasses. That's your problem. Kennedy didn't pause for effect between questions. He simply turned a page in the folder. Let's talk about the winery. Omar's chief of staff, seated directly behind her in the staff row, leaned forward and whispered something. Omar didn't turn around. She was watching Kennedy's folder the way a person watches a doctor's face during a diagnosis, not wanting to hear it but unable to look away. Your husband, Tim Minette, co-founded EST Crew Wines in California in 2021. Your 2024 financial disclosure valued his stake at between $1 million and $5 million. Kennedy reached into the folder and removed a single document. Not the disclosure, but something else. Something the hearing room hadn't seen before. This is the sworn affidavit of the investor who sued your husband for fraud in 2023. I obtained it from the court record. It's public for anyone who cares to look. He began to read. The investor states, and I'm quoting, Mr. Minot showed me photographs of a vineyard in Sonoma County and described it as the primary production facility for EST Crew wines. He represented that the company owned or operated this facility and that my investment would fund its expansion. I invested $300,000 based on these representations. Kennedy looked up. Next paragraph, I subsequently learned that EST Crew did not own, lease, or operate any vineyard. The company was a wine label. It contracted third-party producers to bottle wines under its name. The photographs Mr. Minot showed me were of a vineyard owned by an unrelated party. I was shown pictures of someone else's vineyard. The hearing room was silent in a way that hearing rooms rarely are, not the polite silence of attention, the uncomfortable silence of people who have just heard something that changes the shape of the story. Your husband showed an investor pictures of someone else's vineyard, Kennedy said. Someone else's grapes, someone else's land. To raise $300,000, the investor trusted those pictures. He wrote a check, and he got nothing. Kennedy set the affidavit down. Now, at the time of the lawsuit, 2023, court records show that EST Crew had $650 in its bank account. $650. That's not enough to buy a case of the wine the company was supposedly making. He leaned back. In Louisiana, we have vineyards too. Muscadine mostly. Nothing fancy. But I can tell you, even the muscadine growers know that a vineyard with 0 grapes is worth $0. Not $5 million, not $1 million. 0. Even the grapes know that. A few nervous laughs from the gallery. On the dais, 2 Republican senators were taking notes. A Democratic senator near Omar was looking at her own hands. Budget Committee staff also obtained California Secretary of State records for EST Crew LLC, Kennedy continued. The company filed articles of termination on the 4th of April 2026, 9 days after you amended your disclosure to value it at 0. But here's what's interesting. There are no annual revenue reports on file for fiscal years 2023 or 2024. None. A company that was supposedly worth between $1 million and $5 million didn't file a single revenue report for 2 consecutive years. He folded his hands. So let me summarize the company with no vineyard, no revenue reports, $650 in the bank, an active fraud lawsuit from an investor who was shown pictures of someone else's property and a promised return of 200% that returned exactly 0%, and you valued it on a federal disclosure under penalty of perjury at up to $5 million. He looked at Omar. That, Congresswoman, is the most expensive empty bottle I've ever seen. Omar's aide was writing something on a notepad and sliding it across the desk toward her. Omar didn't look at it. Her eyes were on Kennedy's folder, specifically on how many pages were left. There were many pages left. Kennedy closed the section on the winery. He turned several pages at once, a visible skip, as if he were passing over material he had decided not to use, at least not today, and arrived at a tabbed section. The tab was red. Let me ask you about something different now, Kennedy said. His tone shifted. Not folksy anymore. Not amused. The voice of a man who has been doing arithmetic and has arrived at a number that disturbs him, feeding our future. $250 million. The largest COVID-era fraud scheme in American history. 75 defendants. Fake meal sites. Federal money that was supposed to feed hungry children during a pandemic, funneled instead to luxury cars, jewelry, real estate overseas. Amy Bach, the mastermind, convicted in 2025 on multiple federal charges. Abdikader Idla, a Feeding Our Future employee, indicted and fled the country. He looked at Omar. Your name appeared 6 times in trial exhibits from Amy Bach's case. 6 times. One email chain between Bach and your office had the subject line, Ilhan's office. Another email, February 2021, had the subject line, Help with USDA Food Program. Text messages between you and Bach were recovered during a federal raid on Bach's Minnesota home. I have never been charged with anything related to Omar started. I didn't ask whether you were charged. I asked about the emails, Kennedy replied. But since you bring it up, you haven't been charged. You also haven't been cleared. What you have been is silent. The Minnesota Fraud Prevention Committee invited you to testify. You didn't show up. He reached into the red-tabbed section and pulled out a large document. Oversized, printed in color. A chart. He held it up so the gallery and the cameras could see it. I asked Budget Committee staff to do something else for me, Kennedy said. I asked them to build a timeline. 3 columns. The chart was visible from the gallery. 3 vertical columns, each with dates and short text descriptions, with horizontal lines connecting events across columns. Column 1, dates of communications between the Feeding Our Future fraud ring and your office, as documented in trial exhibits. Column 2, dates you sponsored or co-sponsored legislation affecting USDA meal program oversight. Column 3, dates of the largest fraudulent disbursements from Feeding Our Future. He pointed to the top of the chart. February 2021 email from Amy Bach to your office. Subject line, Help with USDA Food Program. March 2021. You co-sponsored an amendment, expanding emergency USDA waivers for meal program providers. April 2021. Feeding Our Future disbursed $47 million through 38 sites that federal investigators later determined were entirely fictitious. 38 buildings where nobody was cooking and nobody was eating. He moved his finger down the chart. June 2021. Second email chain. Subject line, Ilhan's office. This one between Bach and Abdikader Idla, the man who later fled the United States after being indicted. July 2021, your office submitted a letter to USDA supporting continued emergency waivers for Minnesota meal programs. August 2021, Feeding Our Future disbursed another $62 million. He moved down again. October 2021, text messages between you and Bach recovered during a federal raid. November 2021, you introduced the Meals Act, which loosened oversight requirements for federally funded food distribution programs. December 2021, Feeding Our Future's disbursements peaked at $83 million in a single quarter. Kennedy set the chart down on the desk facing the gallery. Every time your office communicated with the fraud ring, legislation loosened. Every time legislation loosened, money flowed. $47 million, $62 million, $83 million. All to fake sites. All feeding nobody. All paid for by taxpayers. He paused, looked at the chart one more time as if confirming something he already knew but wanted to see in print. I want to talk about what $47 million through 38 fictitious sites actually means, because numbers that large stop being numbers and start being abstractions. So let me make it concrete. Kennedy leaned forward. A fictitious meal site is a building, a storefront, a community center, sometimes a restaurant, that files paperwork with the USDA, saying it served 5,000 meals in a month, or 10,000, or 20,000 children's meals, breakfasts and lunches for kids who needed them. The paperwork gets filed, the federal money gets dispersed, and nobody checks whether a single child ate a single meal, because during COVID, the oversight was waived. The inspections were paused. The waivers that you pushed for, Congresswoman, meant that nobody had to prove that the meals existed. He pointed back at the chart. 38 buildings filing claims for meals that were never cooked, never served, never eaten, while real kids in Minneapolis were going hungry because the money that was supposed to feed them was being spent on luxury cars and real estate overseas. The hearing room was completely still, the kind of stillness that comes when every person in the room is doing the same math at the same time and arriving at the same answer. Kennedy's voice dropped, not to a whisper, but to the register a man uses when he's saying something that matters more than politics. Congresswoman, $250 million was stolen from programs designed to feed hungry children during a pandemic, children during COVID when schools were closed and families were struggling, and kids in Minneapolis, kids in your district, were depending on meal programs to eat. He paused. And your name is in the emails of the woman who stole the money that was supposed to feed them? Omar leaned toward her microphone. I was helping constituents access legitimate programs. That is what a representative does. I have never, ma'am. Kennedy's voice was quiet, but it cut through hers like a knife through warm butter. Abdikadir Idla, the man in the Ilhan's office email. He didn't flee the United States because he was helping constituents access legitimate programs. He fled because he was stealing from children. And his emails, Congresswoman, reference your office. Omar's grip on her nameplate tightened until her knuckles were visible from the gallery, lighter against her skin, the small bones pressing outward. Her aide had stopped writing notes and was on the phone, cupping the receiver, whispering urgently. Omar's posture had changed. She was no longer facing Kennedy. She was angled toward her staff, toward the exit side of the dais, the body language of a person who is calculating the distance between where she is and where she wants to be. And you appeared on video in Somali at one of the restaurants in the program, praising it, Kennedy added. Right as the fraud was exploding, you praised the program on camera while the money was being stolen. Kennedy turned to the next section. His voice returned to the arithmetic register, measured, specific, almost pleasant in its precision. The voice of a man reading numbers the way a doctor reads test results. 5 days ago, Kennedy said, the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board issued an order regarding your campaign committee. I have a copy, page 7. He held up a document, printed, official seal visible. The board found that your campaign committee violated state reporting requirements. They imposed a civil penalty. They ordered you to reimburse your campaign $3,469.23 for using campaign funds for personal expenses, specifically immigration services and joint tax returns. He looked at Omar. You used donor money to do your taxes. People gave you money to run for Congress, and you used it to file your tax return. That's not an interpretation. That's the board's finding. Kennedy turned to a different page. But page 7 isn't the interesting part. Page 13 is the interesting part. I doubt many reporters got to page 13. Most of them stopped at the headline. But I'm on the budget committee. Reading past page 7 is my job. He adjusted his glasses and read, page 13. The board further finds that the Omar Committee failed to provide documentation for 14 additional expenditures, totaling $41,200, for which the stated purpose was listed only as community outreach with no further specification. The board orders additional disclosure within 10 days. He set the document down. $41,200. 14 payments. All listed as community outreach. No receipts, no descriptions, no beneficiaries named, no dates of events, no photographs, no attendance records, just community outreach. 14 times. Kennedy took off his glasses, cleaned them with his tie. A folksy gesture, unhurried, the gesture of a man with all the time in the world. When I was a young lawyer, Congresswoman, I learned that the three most dangerous words in financial fraud are miscellaneous, consulting, and outreach. You know why? Because they mean everything, which means they mean nothing, which means nobody can check. He put his glasses back on. 14 payments, $41,200, no receipts. In Louisiana, we call that a pattern. The Campaign Finance Board apparently agreed. The investigation is ongoing. He leaned forward slightly. Let me add it up, because that's what this committee is supposed to do. Add things up. A financial disclosure off by $29.9 million. A winery valued at $5 million with $650 in the bank and pictures of someone else's vineyard. Your name 6 times in the emails of a $250 million fraud ring that stole from children's nutrition programs. A campaign finance violation confirmed 5 days ago, and $41,200 in mystery payments that nobody can explain. Kennedy looked at Omar. You sit on the Budget Committee, Congresswoman. You are supposed to oversee how the United States government spends trillions of dollars of the people's money. And your own numbers, your personal numbers, the ones on the forms with your signature, don't add up. He shook his head slowly. The disappointment was worse than anger. The folksy charm was gone. What was left was a man who had spent his career studying numbers and had found numbers that made him sad. Mom, I've been doing arithmetic since Mrs. Thibodeau's 3rd grade class in Zachary, Louisiana. And I can tell you none of your numbers add up. Not one. Omar started to speak. Her mouth opened, the first syllable of a word formed, then died. She started again. A different word. It died too. The rapid-fire speaker, the woman who could deliver a 3-minute floor speech without notes, who could pivot from policy to personal attack to moral indignation in a single breath. That woman had encountered a problem that rhetoric couldn't solve. Numbers, just numbers. And every number was wrong. Kennedy sat still for a moment. He closed the folder, set it aside, removed his glasses, and placed them on top of the folder. The gestures were deliberate, the visible closing of one chapter and the opening of another. The room understood something different was coming. I have one more question, Congresswoman, Kennedy said. And it's not about numbers. His voice had changed. The folksy warmth was gone. The arithmetic precision was gone. What remained was something quieter and older. The voice of a man in a church pew. The voice of a father at a funeral. The voice of someone who is about to say something that costs him something to say. On the 10th of September 2025, Charlie Kirk, a 1-year-old man, a husband and a father of 2 small children, was assassinated at Utah Valley University. He was shot in the neck by a sniper while speaking at a public event. He died at the hospital. His wife, Erica, was not at the event. She learned her husband was dead from a phone call. The hearing room had been quiet before. This was different. This was the silence of people who had stopped breathing. On the 11th of September 2025, one day after Charlie Kirk was shot through the neck, you went on television on a town hall with Mehdi Hassan, and you implied that Charlie Kirk was responsible for his own murder. Kennedy's voice was barely above a conversational register. No projection, no performance, the voice of a man saying something that he wished he didn't have to say. On the 12th of September 2025, 2 days after a 3-1-a-year-old father was assassinated, you reposted a video on social media, that video called Charlie Kirk a stochastic terrorist. It called him Dr. Frankenstein. And it said, and I want to make sure I get this right, because the words matter. It said Charlie Kirk was Dr. Frankenstein and his monster shot him through the neck. Kennedy paused. Not for effect, because the next sentence was hard. His monster shot him through the neck. The hearing room was motionless. On the dais, senators on both sides were looking at their hands, at the desk, at anything except Omar. The discomfort was bipartisan and total. Before this hearing, Kennedy continued, I contacted Erica Kirk's attorney. Not for a statement, not for political purposes. I wanted to know one thing, I asked. In the 8 months since Charlie Kirk's assassination, did Congresswoman Omar ever contact Mrs. Kirk? A phone call, a letter, a text, a staff email, a condolence card, anything. He paused. The answer was no. Kennedy looked at Omar. 8 months. You had time to repost a video mocking her husband's murder. You did that within 48 hours. But in 8 months, 243 days, you didn't find 5 minutes to write a condolence card to a woman whose husband was shot through the neck. Omar was completely still, not the tactical stillness of a politician waiting for her turn to speak. The frozen stillness of a person who has been described accurately and does not enjoy the portrait. A censure resolution was introduced, House Resolution 713. It charges you with conduct unbecoming a member of Congress. Kennedy's voice dropped to nearly a whisper. Charlie Kirk's children are 2 and 4 years old, Congresswoman. They are too young to understand what happened, but they won't always be too young. Someday, they will be old enough to type their father's name into a search engine, and when they do, they will find the video you shared, and they will read the words, Charlie Kirk was Dr. Frankenstein and his monster shot him through the neck, and they will know that a sitting member of Congress said that about their daddy. He stopped. I've been in the Senate for a while now. I've seen a lot of things I wish I hadn't seen. I've heard a lot of things I wish I hadn't heard. But I have never seen a sitting member of Congress celebrate the assassination of a 3-1-year-old father. 2 days after his children lost him, he let the sentence sit. You attacked me 10 minutes ago, Congresswoman. You said I should investigate my own state. You said Louisiana ranks last in things. And you know what? Some of that is fair. Louisiana has real problems. I won't pretend otherwise. I've never pretended otherwise. His voice steadied. But I will tell you what Louisiana doesn't do. Louisiana doesn't celebrate when a young man gets shot through the neck. Louisiana doesn't blame a dead father for his own murder. And Louisiana doesn't share videos mocking a man's assassination while his widow is planning his funeral. No folksy line, no humor, no Boudreaux story. Just a man from Louisiana telling a woman from Minnesota the difference between the two places where it mattered most. Kennedy put his glasses back on, picked up the folder, opened it to the last page. A single sheet, mostly blank, with what appeared to be a handwritten list. Congresswoman, he said, let me summarize. His voice had returned to the arithmetic register, calm, methodical, the voice of a man reading a balance sheet. In the last 12 months, your financial disclosure was off by $29.9 million, 17 line items, including $287,000 in consulting income from a company that closed 3 years ago. Your husband showed an investor photographs of someone else's vineyard to raise $300,000 for a winery that had $650 in the bank and didn't own a single grape. Your name appeared 6 times in the emails of a $250 million fraud ring that stole from children's nutrition programs. And every time your office communicated with the ring, legislation loosened and money flowed. The Minnesota Campaign Finance Board found you broke the law and identified $41,200 in unexplained payments with no receipts, and you responded to the assassination of a 3-1-year-old father by sharing a video that said he deserved what he got. He closed the folder. You sit on the Budget Committee. You are supposed to oversee how the United States government spends trillions of dollars of the people's money. Kennedy leaned forward. The hearing room leaned with him, the unconscious collective movement of people who know the last question is coming. So here's my last question, Congresswoman. Simple arithmetic. The same question that runs through everything we've discussed today. The same question your husband's investor asked about his $300,000. The same question the Minnesota Fraud Prevention Committee tried to ask when they invited you to testify and you didn't show up. The same question the families of hungry children in Minneapolis asked when the meal sites turned out to be empty buildings with luxury cars parked outside. He looked directly at Omar. Where did the money go? Silence. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15 seconds. Omar's mouth opened. Her lips moved. The mechanical beginning of speech. The formation of a word that might have been I or might have been thee. And then, nothing. The word didn't come. She looked to her left, toward her aide. The aide was staring straight ahead. Not at Kennedy, not at Omar, but at a fixed point on the far wall, the expression of someone who has realized that the building is on fire and is calculating the location of the nearest exit. 20 seconds. Kennedy watched her. His expression wasn't triumphant. It wasn't cruel. It was the expression of a man who had asked a question he already knew the answer to, and was simply waiting for the silence to confirm it. You know, Congresswoman, Kennedy said softly, that's the same answer you gave the Minnesota Fraud Prevention Committee, the same answer your husband's investor got when he asked about his $300,000, the same answer the families of children who were supposed to get free meals during a pandemic got when they asked where the food went. He took off his glasses, folded them, set them on the desk with the care of a man putting a tool away for the day. Nothing. You gave them all nothing. The hearing room was so quiet that the sound of the ventilation system was audible, the soft mechanical hum of air moving through a building that had heard 1,000 hearings and would hear 1,000 more, but that had rarely heard a silence like this one. Kennedy leaned back in his chair. He did not smile. He did not look at the cameras. He looked at Omar. And for a moment the look was not that of an adversary. It was something closer to the sadness of a man who had spent his career in public service and had watched too many people treat the public trust like a credit card with no statement. The audit is just beginning, Congresswoman. I suggest you hire a better accountant. He paused, and this time, check the math. The chairman cleared his throat. We will now proceed to witness testimony. The hearing moved on. The witnesses came forward. The questions resumed. The machinery of government continued to turn the way it always does, regardless of what happens on the dais. But Ilhan Omar did not ask a single question for the remainder of the hearing. She sat behind her nameplate, her briefing materials unopened, her water untouched, her microphone unused. Her aide handed her 3 notes during the next 2 hours. She read none of them. She sat in the chair of a budget committee member, the chair that carries the authority to oversee how trillions of taxpayer dollars are spent. And she said nothing. The woman who had built her career on speaking, on the floor, on television, on social media, in town halls, in interviews, in every format where words can be used as weapons, sat on the budget committee and was silent. not because she chose silence, because every number was wrong. And she knew it. And now everyone else knew it too. The clip hit social media at 1,134 a.m. Central, posted by a Republican communications staffer who had been recording on her phone from the staff row. By noon, "Where did the money go?" was trending. By 200 p.m., the full 3-minute exchange had been viewed 11 million times across platforms. By evening, it was the most watched Senate hearing clip of the year. The timeline chart, Kennedy's 3-column correlation of emails, legislation, and fraud disbursements, was screenshotted and shared independently of the video. It appeared on Fox News at 400 p.m. as a full-screen graphic. By the next morning, it had been republished by the New York Post, the Washington Free Beacon, and the Daily Wire. 3 former federal prosecutors appeared on cable news to analyze it. 2 of them used the phrase, "consciousness of guilt." The third said simply, "If I were her attorney, I would advise her not to appear before any committee until the DOJ investigation is complete." Omar's office released a statement at 3:15 p.m. It was 3 sentences long. It described Kennedy's questions as a partisan ambush designed to distract from Republican attacks on the social safety net. It did not address the 17 discrepancies. It did not address the E Street Group consulting income. It did not address the investor affidavit or the photographs of someone else's vineyard. It did not address the timeline. It did not address the $41,200 in undocumented community outreach payments. It did not address Charlie Kirk. The statement ended, "Congresswoman Omar remains focused on serving the people of Minnesota's 5th District." By 500 p.m., the Minnesota Fraud Prevention Committee announced it was renewing its request for Omar to appear. This time, the request came with a subpoena threat. By 700 p.m., Chairman Comer's office announced that the House Oversight Committee had received the Budget Committee's forensic analysis and was incorporating it into its ongoing investigation of Omar's financial disclosures. A spokesman for Comer said the 17 discrepancies identified by Senator Kennedy's staff raise serious questions that require answers, not press releases. Omar canceled a scheduled fundraiser in Minneapolis that evening. Her press secretary cited a scheduling conflict. 3 major donors to Omar's campaign contacted her office independently on the same evening to request meetings, the political equivalent of creditors calling in their loans. Kennedy, for his part, held a brief press availability outside the hearing room. A reporter from CNN asked whether he thought Omar should resign from the Budget Committee. Kennedy put his hands in his pockets, tilted his head. Let the drawl do its work. "Well," he said, "I think if you're on a committee that oversees how the government spends money, and your own financial disclosure is off by $29.9 million, and your name is in the emails of a $250 million fraud ring, and the State Campaign Finance Board just found you broke the law, I think maybe that committee is not where you want to be. Not because of politics, because of arithmetic." A reporter pressed, "Senator, are you saying she should step down?" Kennedy smiled, the half-smile, the one that meant the answer was coming, and it would be worse than whatever the reporter expected. "I'm saying her numbers don't add up, and on the Budget Committee, that's kind of the whole job." Another reporter, Senator, Congresswoman Omar, says this was a partisan ambush. Your response? Kennedy's smile faded, not into anger, into something more genuine, something that looked for a moment like the face he wore when he wasn't on camera. "Look," he said, "I didn't ambush anybody. I asked questions about numbers. Numbers aren't partisan. 2 + 2 doesn't care whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. $650 is $650, whether you like me or you don't." and an investor who got shown pictures of someone else's vineyard. That investor doesn't care about my politics. He cares about his $300,000. He adjusted his glasses. The congresswoman called me a country lawyer. She's right. I am a country lawyer. And country lawyers are real simple, ma'am. We just follow the money, and when we can't find it, we keep asking until somebody tells us where it went. He paused. The drawl thickened. She didn't tell us. That's fine. The DOJ is asking the same question, and they're a lot less folksy than I am. He walked away, unhurried. The walk of a man who had done his math and was satisfied with the answer. The consequences came faster than anyone expected, including Omar's own staff. By Thursday morning, the House Republican Conference introduced a resolution to remove Omar from the Budget Committee. The resolution cited the 17 financial disclosure discrepancies, the ongoing DOJ investigation, and the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board's finding of law violation. The vote was scheduled for the following week. Democratic leadership issued a statement defending Omar's right to serve, but notably, the statement came from the caucus communications office, not from the minority leader personally. The absence of a personal defense from leadership was, in Washington, louder than any statement could have been. On Friday, the DOJ's Public Integrity Section confirmed through a spokesman that it had received the Budget Committee's forensic analysis and the 3-column timeline, and that the materials had been incorporated into its ongoing review of Congresswoman Omar's financial disclosures and related matters. The phrase, related matters, 2 words that in DOJ language mean the investigation has expanded beyond its original scope, appeared on every cable news chyron within the hour. That same Friday, the Minnesota Fraud Prevention Committee issued the subpoena. Not a request, not an invitation. A subpoena, signed by the committee chair, demanding Omar's appearance and the production of all communications between her office and any individual or entity connected to Feeding Our Future. Omar's attorney filed a motion to quash. The motion was denied the following Monday. The fundraising numbers told the rest of the story. In the 72 hours after the hearing, Omar's campaign received $12,000 in new donations, a number her finance team described internally as catastrophic for a sitting congresswoman in a safe district. In the same period, her opponent in the upcoming primary, a moderate DFL challenger who had been polling at 18%, raised $340,000, nearly all of it from first-time donors who cited the hearing in their donation notes. By the following Wednesday, 1 week after the hearing, Omar had not appeared on a single television program, no CNN, no MSNBC, no interviews, no floor speeches, no social media posts about policy. Her account posted twice, once about a constituent service event and once about a Minneapolis road project. The woman who had averaged 3 media appearances per week for 6 years had gone completely dark. Her silence was not strategic. It was legal. Her attorney had advised her in writing to make no public statements regarding her financial disclosures, the Feeding Our Future emails, or the DOJ investigation until further notice. The advice was standard for a client facing potential federal scrutiny. What was not standard was how quickly it had become necessary. In Cedar Riverside, Minneapolis, the neighborhood that national media calls Little Mogadishu and its residents call home, Abdi Farah stood behind the counter of his convenience store and watched the hearing on his phone. The phone was propped against the lotto ticket display. The screen cracked in the upper left corner, a permanent reminder of the day his son dropped it and cried for 20 minutes because he thought his father would be angry. Abdi wasn't angry. It was a phone. Phones break. You fix them, or you don't. The crack stayed. He watched Kennedy read the timeline. Emails, legislation, fraud disbursements, $47 million, $62 million, $83 million. Abdi knew 3 of the fake meal sites from the Feeding Our Future case. He didn't know them from the news. He knew them from the block. One was 2 streets from his store, a storefront with meals for children painted on the window in green and white letters. He used to walk past it every morning on his way to open the store. He saw the luxury cars parked outside. He saw the men who went in and out. Men who didn't look like they were cooking meals. Men who didn't look like they were feeding children. Men who looked like they were counting something that wasn't. And that brings us to the real question. When the dust finally settles on this brutal 2-3-minute floor battle, what is the ultimate legacy here? Does using forensic accounting to expose a rival permanently protect the integrity of the institution? Or does it signal that committee hearings are now the ultimate courtroom where political careers go to die? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to know if you think Kennedy's audit strategy was a masterclass in accountability or just the new standard for political warfare. And if you made it this far, hit that subscribe button to catch the next breakdown. See you in the next one.